for the invitation. As mentioned, I will not deal with the country-specific issue, but with the state aid issue in general on EU level. Yet I will try to do my best to make some Central and Eastern European make some relevance in this regard. Just in a nutshell, what is our starting point? We have diverse level legal acts and actors in this case. In case of the state aid law, of course, we have the treaties, just like in other policy areas of the European Union. These are the Treaty on Functioning of the European Union, 107. Not so many provisions actually, not more than 3. And these are originated back at the beginning of the whole integration story. I will try to do my best to describe you today some kind of evolutionary road, how this whole policy area evolved throughout the last decades. Then in the 60s, 70s, and especially in the last 3 decades came much more secondary legislation. Main actors, of course, Council, European Parliament. In the last 20 years, also the Commission came with many soft law legal sources. What we can see, what I will refer to today, is these exemptions rules. So yes, there is a member states guaranteeing some kind of a state aid, and what is described by the EU is actually when these state aids are not to be notified to the European Commission, which functions as a competition authority. And not last but not least, we have the Court of Justice and the Court of Justice case law, which had a pivotal role to interpret these treaty provisions. I will refer to two areas in this regard, because as far as I can see, I could describe in this book chapter, there is some kind of a harmonization or expansion of the state aids. The first one will refer to taxation, and the second one will be the greening, as we are living in the age of green and digital transition of the European Union. This is the legal story. Is there any other story? Of course there is, especially in this case, because we're speaking about state aid, speaking about internal market story. What is the economic history? Back in the 1950s, the whole thing started like treating the subsidy, the state aid, as some kind of a bad label. And at that time, there was a much less intensive regulatory approach. It has changed tremendously in the 1970s with the collapse of the Bretton Woods system, with 2 oil shocks, and Japanese and American companies started locating their plants in the European Union with parallel reactions. The first one was promoting by certain member states their national undertakings, providing subsidies. On the other side, they started to realize, the EEC at that time, that we need a much more coherent industrial policy in this regard. Why? Because there is a global competition. I do not mean to refer to each and every point of this evolutionary road, just to mention as point 3, the modernization of the reform steps. The last one was dated back to 2012 with the state aid modernization reform. Actually, the Commission itself, as a EU-level competition authority, realized that it does not have the capacity to scrutinize and investigate each and every state aid. Therefore, the emphasis has been given to the member states level. What we have today, and that's the main point of my presentation, thus the history repeats itself. Why? Back in the 1970s, energy crisis, foreign money, direct investments coming in. Do we have the same story, or is it a different story compared to that of the 1970s? What we have today at the beginning of the 2020s, or 2023, 2024, actually the last and most interesting thing was, of course, the COVID era in this regard. The Commission reacted relatively quickly by suspending and reinterpreting the state aid rules, and most notably a so-called temporary framework, state aid temporary framework, has been introduced as main regulatory change. What was the outcome of this whole story? Most of the exemptions became, well, not insufficient, but they have been suspended. As I mentioned you before, already the 2012 state aid modernization reform package started to put more emphasis on the member states, so they are the ones to investigate the national state aids. This has been intensified with this state aid temporary framework introduced during the COVID times. Why was it problematic? It was problematic, highly problematic. I just wanted to refer to these two diagrams. The lower one is the amount of the comparison between the different member states, how much state aid have been guaranteed for their national competitors. You can see the big blue one that's actually 51% guaranteed by Germany, which is a lot. Dark blue, the rest of the EU, 7%. You can imagine, so that was a huge distortion of the competition between the different member states. Actually, if we just compare three major players, member states like France, Italy, and Spain, it is also clear that France could, well, I wouldn't say so overreact, but could be much more influential compared to that of Spain or Italy in this reaction to the COVID crisis. What's the problem? I also refer to this sentence in the book chapter. Some may use bazookas, while the others only slingshots. So, and that's not the same. Actually, there was a question whether the EU should introduce new EU-level funds. Yes, some of them have been introduced. For instance, CR2, 3, REACT-EU, or the SURE means. But there was also a plan to introduce a new solvency support instrument, but it has failed. What is, in my opinion, proper newcoming that this exemptions period technically finished at the end of 2023. So we are, orange is the new black. The exemptions was the new main rule. It has technically ended at the end of 2023. But we will see that this will be enough from side of the EU and the Commission to deal with this kind of market distortion within the internal market. As I mentioned you at the beginning, there is also a greater story because we do have another major players in the 70th year of the integration, and this is the Court of Justice. Of course, at the beginning, this was like referring to the court to interpret these articles of the Treaty of the Functioning, or back then at the EEC Treaty. What we see today is this kind of expansion of state aid rules. The first area is the taxation. We know the story of LuxLeaks and all the cases, or most of the cases, where it has been revealed that certain member states guaranteed different tax rules arrangements for multinational enterprises, mainly US-based, but also not US-based. The question was at that time, so who are the actors on the scene? The member states versus the Commission acting as a competition authority, that can we label this individual tax rules or arrangements as so-called state aids? Why was it important? And yeah, I'm now referring to this last section. This is also rather a political question, not just legal, because it was some kind of a position or new position making from side of the Commission, gaining new powers. It has hardly any power in taxation, but it's much stronger, much powerful in the competition policy. The criteria which was applied was highly complex. I don't mean to scrutinize this in details, but they started to use this kind of, can a state aid be labeled as, can a taxation, individual taxation arrangement labeled as fiscal state aid or indirect state aid. So there was a selectivity criteria. They also used the OECD's arm's length principles, and these were the cases, so the transfer pricing cases between the different branches, the US and the European branch, or the different branches within the single market in member state number 1 between member state number 2. What was the outcome? That was actually pretty interesting in my opinion. We only have the judgments 5 or 6 from the General Court. The General Court concluded that there was no manifest errors made by the European Commission, and it is somehow true that we are still waiting for the final decision by the court, but the Commission, it was a Commission task to identify also the manifest errors in these national practices, and they couldn't find it. Neither in the so-called Apple case, the Amazon case, the Starbucks case, and neither in the Nike case. There was only one exception, that was the Fiat Chrysler Bank based in Luxembourg, and in this case the General Court concluded that the methodology applied in this tax arrangement guaranteed by Luxembourg was that was a manifest error, and it was incompatible with the ordinary market circumstances. So what's the outcome of this whole taxation story? We are waiting for the second instance judgments, but it seems that the court remained less activist or somehow reluctant to label these taxation arrangements between the member states and the multinational enterprises as state aid. Yet there is some kind of a positive outcome, I would say so. National tax regulations have been substantially modified, and also the better cooperation has been established between the national authorities. So I would conclude in this regard that there is some kind of a spillover effect on the taxation area as well, originated from the state aid. And I just wanted to ask later on, if we have the time, from frankly speaking, I'm not a taxation lawyer, that I just realized today morning that the new rules came into effect as of January 2024 on the minimum tax corporation rules, with this global 15%, also in form of EU law. And I would say so that this is also a positive outcome of this whole story, originated back to the Court of Justice. Second thing, this is probably, in my opinion, even more interesting, how the state aid law is expanding like the universe. Austria initiated, well, several action for annulments back in the last 10 years. And there are two cases which I would like to refer to. The first one is the last case of Great Britain. That was the Hinkley Point C nuclear power plant. And I just wanted to make some kind of a Central and Eastern European relevance, or put something like this into my presentation. There is Hungary is also planning to build a new nuclear power plant next to the existing Paks 1 reactors. Both of these nuclear projects have been challenged before the Court of Justice. Interestingly, just like in case of the taxation, the question was here as well, state aid and not greening or EU environmental law. Why not? Because actually, according to the Euratom treaties and also based on the Treaty on Functioning of the EU, it's up to the member states to choose their energy mix. And Austria started these cases like, yes, but do we have state aid which is incompatible or contrary to the internal market laws? Just like in the taxation, we do have two decisions. The first one is final. I mean, the second instance decision in case of the HPC, and the second one is the Paks 2 hasn't been concluded yet by the court itself. What was the conclusion? Actually, the court referred to this prerogative of the member states, that it's up to the member state to choose its energy mix. Therefore, it will not overrule the text of the treaties, which is, to be honest, in my opinion, not a surprise. The second question was pretty similar to that of the taxation matters. No manifest error has been conducted by the Commission in the investigation of these state aid cases. What was even more interesting is just one thing at the end of this whole judgment. In the HPC case, and we as competition lawyers started to refer to the HPC judgment as maybe some kind of a game changer, because the court concluded that an aid must be compatible with EU environmental law, which means that if it's not compatible, then it's automatically per se should be declined by the Commission. Yet the General Court back in, that was at the end of 2022, made some kind of a step sideways, I would say so. It's in its conclusion, it referred to the breach of the EU law as an investigation requirement due to be done by the Commission, only referring to that areas which are indissociably linked to the state aid itself. So therefore, these are the economic considerations, and as far as we can see, not to the greening laws of the European Union. Actually, Austria started to refer to the general principles of EU environmental law, sustainability, polluter pays, whatsoever. But the General Court also concluded that these are two abstract ones. What we are actually waiting for is probably the EU legislator coming up with the new EU climate laws. Maybe this could be some kind of a game changer in the upcoming scrutiny level and requirements in the state aid investigations. But in general, we may conclude, based on the taxation and based on this nuclear installation matters, that applying state aid could have this expansion effect, yet the court itself seems to be reluctant to play the activist part or the activist actor in this regard. Title of my book chapter refers to the fact that from the beginning in the 1950s, when the whole state aid story was some kind of a subsidy control, we could get to the 2020s, and nowadays we may label the state aid and this whole policy areas as the subsidy governance. To refer to my question whether the history repeats itself compared to that of the 1970s, only partly, I would say so. Yes, there is an energy crisis, COVID crisis whatsoever, but we have much more. So the number of the member states is much broader, and policy areas involved in this whole integration process is much broader. Slightly a repeat of the history. Yet what I refer to as a conclusion is the so-called horizontalization of EU law and the state aid law, which could be labeled as some kind of a governance. Just if you have a look at the questions which are highly relevant in case of state aid, industry, common foreign and security policy, foreign direct investment, Green Deal, commercial relations. If you just look at the incoming Chinese electronic cars, these could be highly relevant, and each and every areas have some kind of state aid relevance in this regard. On the one hand, the Court of Justice seems to be less activist in this horizontalization process, because in most of the cases, they did not conclude that there was a Commission manifest error in its investigation. There is no broader interpretation of the treaty provisions, and in this regard, there is no competence expansion. Yet, the state aid is coming high up on the agenda, and as I mentioned, the exemption rules are effective as of 2024. So, thank you very much. Any questions, comments are really welcome.